This is Transcend with Nat, where we are awakening to the spiritual heart and sharing stories and awarenesses along the path of transcendence. Hi, and welcome to Transcend with Nat. This is Nat. I'm your host, and today we're going to be talking about how we seed the future with our current actions, our current thoughts, how we speak, what we say, what we do, how all of these things together seed our future. They're like planting seeds that grow in the future. And to do that, I'm going to do it with the help of my latest book, which you can get on Amazon, which is Transcending the Practice of Spiritual Living, Volume 2. And I'm going to start with the second chapter called Today We Seed the Future. And I'm going to read a couple things. I'll start with one and then maybe read a little bit more from the chapter going forward, but I'm going to discuss it with you also. So it starts out, today's harm will be the reason for tomorrow's war. Today's compassion will be the foundation for tomorrow's peace. Today we seed the future. You see the cycle of war that we see in our world on a macro level and also on a microscopic level within ourselves and within our personal relationships in our families. The cycle of violence, the cycle of hurt, the cycle of harm continues through history. We see it continuing today in our world. And there's a lot of misunderstanding. Even, I think World War I was called the war to end all wars. And you don't create peace through war. That's just not how it functions. War begets war because war and violence and things of that lesser nature and how we interact with each other, it creates more harm, more disturbance. It puts out those psychic frequencies of harm and disturbance. And those will continue on until someone decides that it stops with them. And the way that we bring forward the goodness in our world, that also is something that as we bring forward goodness, that ripples through time as well. As we treat our family, ourselves, those who are close to us, with greater loving, with greater compassion, with understanding, forgiveness, and acceptance, as we act in those ways, that also seeds future goodness, future loving, future caring, future peace. Peace begets peace, war begets war, violence begets violence, and loving begets loving. If you want to have greater loving in your life, you must start by creating that loving. And there is an idea of sacrifice here. And I'm going to go back to the book Transcending. My latest one is Volume 2. And talk a little bit about sacrifice also in this second chapter of Today We See the Future. The current violence will keep perpetuating itself until someone decides that the violence stops with them. What's required for the violence to stop? Sacrifice. To sacrifice what has taken place. It takes a person to decide that the hurt, the disturbance, the pain stops with them, and that they will stand up and choose to sacrifice their hurt and their reasons for revenge in order to have peace. And it is a sacrifice. It's extremely personal because the revenge may be justified. The violence may be justified, but it's when we withhold the violence that is justified that we start seeding peace for the future. And that's the sacrifice. And forgiveness is a sacrificing of the past, of the hurt, of the disturbance. And where do we carry that disturbance? We carry it within us. So where does the forgiveness need to come from? It needs to come from within us. We need to forgive the disturbance inside of ourselves. And to do that, we forgive the judgments, because most of those disturbances are based on a judgment, which is saying that things should be different, that things shouldn't be the way they are. And when we judge in that way, and that judgment usually has a negative emotional frequency tied into that judgment and stored within our consciousness on different levels of consciousness. Could be even stored in our body, those judgments, which is why when we do forgiveness, sometimes you have that breathe out, you feel something release from your body. Sometimes it's a pressure in your mind or on your heart and your emotions that you feel that release. And so forgiveness is really a sacrificing of the hurt, of the pain, of the disturbance. And when you do that, and then you bring forward the loving, that upward flow of energy that happens naturally as you let go of the disturbance, that will ripple forward in time in your life, in the lives of others, and in this world. And so the more that you bring forward consciously that loving, empathy, compassion, and compassion is a word made up of being with suffering. So compassion, passion is suffering, and adding that prefix makes it with. So with suffering. So you're with someone who's suffering. The empathy isn't sympathy. We don't need sympathy. Sympathy is feeling sorry for someone else. Empathy is saying, you and I are one. We're together. And in that oneness, I appreciate, I understand, I'm with you in what you're going through. And really that speaks to the greater oneness of who we are and who each of us is as a soul, as that divine unit of energy, that divine aspect of who we are in God, as God, extending itself through us in that energy unit of the soul, of the divine, that is perfect. And in that we share our commonality. And in our commonality, we have the compassion and empathy for each other. And the more we bring forward that, the more we see the future. And this doesn't just work in our relationships. It's also reflected in business and a lot of things that we do, because we invest now the results for the future. That's something, there was a Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon. He had a quote, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I don't have it in front of me, but you can look it up if you like, where he was speaking that people will congratulate him on the results of having a good quarter, of his earnings being good, of the results of his business being good that quarter. And he says that the results of this current quarter are based on decisions that were made and actions that were taken 3 years ago. So he's working on not the next quarter's earnings, not the next quarter's numbers, but he's working 3 years from now on that quarter, because he understood that it's like gardening. It's like you plant the seed now, and you plant it with your actions, and in your spiritual life, in your personal life, you plant it with, you're doing your spiritual exercises, which is that moving inward, closing your eyes, taking time with the beloved within you, chanting the sacred tones, chanting the names of God on different levels. And if you'd like to know more about that, you can actually, there's a appendix here that explains how to do spiritual exercises, how to do the chanting, the listening for the sound current of God, which is that frequency of God that moves throughout all levels of creation. And so as you're doing your spiritual exercises inwardly, as you're doing your service in this world, and that service is the expression of loving. And JR, John Roger, who's my spiritual teacher and way shower, who I lived and worked with for many years, for those of you who haven't heard the stories, as soon as you listen to one of these podcasts, you know that who JR is, John Roger. He used to say that your work is your love made manifest. And so make your work, make your actions, make your relationships with others, with yourself, with God, based on loving. And this isn't some new concept. If you look at all of the spiritual teachers, the mystics, the prophets, the sages, you listen to all of these truth teachers, and if they truly are speaking the truth, they're going to be saying some form of be loving in your life, be compassionate with others, be caring with yourself. Jesus talked about it. Love, what are the greatest commandments? Loving God with all your heart, body, mind, and soul, loving your neighbor as yourself. How will you know that you're my disciples, that you love one another? This is based on loving. What I teach, what so many before me that I reference and that I look to spiritually, currently, as my sources, they all speak towards this idea of having greater loving and compassion for yourself and others and with God. And as you develop that greater loving focus in your life, you're actually changing the world. I mean, look at this guy who walked around in sandals in the desert in Israel. The story of that, of him talking about loving and what he did in his life and what he did through his sacrifice, look at how he changed history. Look at how so many of these mystics who lived various types of life, or even philosophers, those who have tapped into this other energy of spirit, who've brought forward a message for their time, who has actually affected the course of human history. That there's power in expressing with loving and caring and compassion. And we can see that throughout history. And yes, there's also effects from the wars and the disturbance and the violence. And that's the beauty of this world in terms of it being a classroom for us to learn our lessons, for us to learn how to work more fully with our Creator by, as an extension of that, us being responsible creators, co-creating with that energy force within us that is God, and being responsible to those creations. And the greatest responsibility to our creations is to love our creations. That is our responsibility, is to love our creations. That is the learning here on this level. And so as we are creating and as we are loving our creations, that sets up our future, and that ripples through time and affects the whole consciousness on the planet. So if you really want to help things, if you look out in the world and see the evil, the darkness, the disturbance, the things that are bothering you, and you really want to make a difference, a lasting difference, then you start right where you are, and you start amplifying that energy of loving, of compassion, of empathy, of caring. The more you do that, the more you seed that to grow into something beautiful in the future. And it may be a future that you're a part of, and it may be a future that many generations from now benefit from the loving, the caring, and the kind words that you're speaking in this time. So until next time, you can get the book that we've been referencing on Amazon. And also, if you're interested in working more closely with me, I'm doing spiritual life reviews, and you can go onto my website, transcend.online, and get more information about working one-on-one with me, about doing a spiritual life review. It's really an opportunity for you to take some time with yourself, to really take some deep time to look at your life in the light, to let go of the things that are blocking you, to transcend the challenges, and to become more connected to the spiritual heart within you, that heart of God, and have more light in your life. That's all available, transcend.online. You can also get my book on Amazon, or There's also a weekly newsletter that goes with this. If you haven't gotten that, it's also called Transcend with Nat, like this podcast. I hope to hear from you, to see you involved in this, and whether you are or not, maintain loving that focus in your life. God bless you all, and until next time, Berush Beishan, which means the blessings already on.
Just forgive yourself, come on, let it be, 'cause I'm free.